started with Adobe Photoshop, and I have several things to show you on our first video here. So let's go ahead and just kind of jump in with both feet, and we'll address some concepts and principles as we go. So I have sort of a stack of images here to kind of play around with. They're just pretty much like random images from my hard drive. Some of them are from the internet, some of them are scanned with professional scanning equipment, some of them are shot with my 20 megapixel camera, and one of them, you might have one is a glitch of a 200 pixel image. So we have a lot of variety to choose from, and we'll be able to kind of, talk around different types of images and when you would want to use them and why. We're going to be kind of focusing today on getting ready for your assignment. So probably the first thing I want to do when we open a Photoshop is we're going to go ahead and create a new document. You may want to hold off on using that document as your actual assignment document because I'm going to be playing around with it to show you things. So we probably will do some experimenting with resolution and things like that, and then we'll jump into actually kind of working towards the assignment. So here you have the option to create a new image or open one, and as I said, I think we're gonna create a new image. I went ahead already and set it for the values that I wanted it to be, so it's kind of preset for me, but you would basically type in the width, the height. I made it landscape format just to kind of point out that you can. I think it's fascinating that in our assignments, the portrait format is the default, right, for the software. And probably about 80% of the assignments that I get are in portrait format. So I just want to remind you that you can indeed make it in landscape. All you have to do is click the little button, or just, enter width and height accordingly. So we're putting it at 300 pixels per inch. That's actually pretty important, so we're going to kind of take note of that. And we're going to be doing some kind of experimentation with that. We're also putting it in RGB color, and here yours might be preset to white. I went ahead and decided to make my grid transparent here. So that's a thing. And that's really just personal preference. You can use white, there's nothing wrong with that. You can use any color of the rainbow if it works for you. I think that the transparent grid has some advantages. So we'll go ahead and hit create there. And now we're kind of left with this literally like a blank canvas. So, I can use my multi-touch I'm on a Mac. So I can zoom by pinching, and I can also, when I'm zoomed in, I can pan with the two fingers. So those are two kind of like really easy ways to use the multi-touch that are really kind of obvious. So let's see. First, I guess, before we get into anything else, I want to talk a little bit about the workspace of Photoshop. So my screen recorder, for some strange reason, is not allowing me to record the very top menu. So we're just going to have to use our imagination as far as that goes. But over here, you have your dock. And your dock can be kind of, push in and out using those little carrots. And also within your dock, you can take anything out of the dock and turn it into a floating palette. I guess this is maybe just some of my own personal hangups coming through. I'm not a huge fan of the dock. So you'll see when I work on examples and stuff that I'll tend to take what I'm working with and pull it out as a palette. That's not really, a big deal. It's just kind of one of those little things. But you may notice now that I've pulled it out as a palette, it's gone from the dock. So how do I get it back is not a terrible question. Well, you would go up to the Window menu, and where it says Workspace, I tend to go for the Essentials workspace for this class. It's the most straightforward, and it does the most, all the things that you would want it to do. You can go to just under that, Reset Essentials. And that should give us our sort of, full complement of stuff back. So we were looking specifically, I think, for the channels palette, and it is indeed back. So my sort of doc had been kind of depleted because I had, opened a bunch of stuff and then not really thought about it. This workspace is really just like it's like a starting deck of cards, right? So these are not necessarily the functions that you might find yourself using. Like, let's imagine that, let's say, for example, I'll get rid of the channels palette, which we probably won't even be using in this class. So I'm going to pop it out. I'll close it. And then I may say, rightfully so, how do I get the channels palette back? Well, you can do what I just did and reset the workspace, right? And that's going to just completely reset everything and kind of give you like the factory defaults. So if you find yourself stuck and like things don't work, and that's a good kind of like it's a literal reset button to kind of get things back to where they should be. If you only want to bring that one thing back and you don't want to reset the whole workspace, you can also go in here to the Window menu and you'll find this long list of stuff. And on that long list of stuff is the channels. So here I just clicked on channels from that long list of stuff, and what that does for me is it opens up a channels palette. And so now I can just go in here and put it back on the dock if I want to. So this is one of those things that's people tend to find a way to kind of like work around or work with this in either way. But it is pretty important because it contains a lot of the functionality that you need to actually use Photoshop. So once again, if you're kind of looking for a function and it's not listed here, or it's not listed up at the top, if you have a much larger screen ratio, you would want to go to Window and then look in that long list, and you can bring it up. So those are all the potential palettes or, dockable objects that you can have in Photoshop. All right, so we have this awesome file here, and we can, do various things to it. There's nothing on it right now, so the sort of imagination can run wild. What I want to do before we kind of get into anything really creative is I want to test out what the kind of boundaries of resolution are in Photoshop. So I can kind of illustrate that for you all. So what I did is I just grabbed a brush, and it's got black. It's going to lay down a black line right now. If you go to the brush palette up here, it's kind of permanently docked here if you're using a brush tool. So I clicked on the hard round brush, although it doesn't really matter. I mean, these are just presets. You can also just dial it in, which is what I usually do. So I'm going to go ahead and make like a kind of abstract design that has lots of, lots of curves and lots of, maybe I'll put in a few. By the way, if you control click, you can also bring up the brush palette when you're making a brush. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of messing around. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a really big brush, and I'm going to make a brush that kind of like dominates this whole thing here. So what I'm really looking for in the case of this big brush is this sort of, here, let me get a smaller cursor. is this kind of gently swooping curved line. So we're going to do a couple of things here now with this image. We're going to kind of like break it, or we're going to try. So in order to kind of break it, I think first we have to kind of maybe think a little bit about what it is. And so what we're seeing right now is the image that we just made. So if we need a refresher on what we just did, we can go to image size. And you can see here our image, that 8.5 by 11 stuff isn't showing up right now. So that's because right now I have my units set to be pixels. And so that's kind of a normal thing for me. I work in pixels most of the time. It's just easier. I find it easier. But if you're working for print size, it's definitely better to, work with inches, because most printers specify the size of the paper and all that stuff. So if you're doing any work for print, you really should be working in inches or millimeters. In any case, right now it gives us, and so this unit here is really just a preview of whatever you're going to see, you're selecting the unit. So by changing this to inches, we have not changed anything. We've just changed the way it displays. You can always see your pixel dimensions up here. You can see it's 3,300 pixels by 2,550 pixels. So that's telling me a couple of things right now. That's telling me that this image is respectable in scale. It's not a small image. So probably if we wanted to affect the resolution of this image, we would maybe consider, and by affect I mean negatively affect, we would maybe actually be better served to go smaller. But sort of traditional wisdom is not to make your image any bigger. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and make it more pixels, which would be, if we double the resolution, that would be 600. So if we double the resolution, what is going to happen is we're going to double the dimension of pixels in each dimension, width and height, X and Y. So you can see it also added some file size to the file. So it was 24 megabytes, which is not a small image, but it's not a big image either. And now it's 96 megabytes. So I'm going to just open this window up a little bit bigger so you can kind of get a much better preview of what this might look like. So I'm going to move to like an area of the image where we can really see some change, and hopefully that'll be maybe right about here. You can see right now that this box that says to resample is checked. That's actually a very important box in Photoshop. We're going to unclick it. And you can see without the resample box clicked, we're not able to make any changes to the scale. What just happened there, by the way? Well, I'll tell you. It basically reverted back to our old size. So if I go here to pixels, now why, with 600 dpi, why did it make the width and the height smaller? Well, the reason is when you raise the DPI, you have to shrink the file in order to make it the same file size or the same pixel size. So what it did, by doubling the resolution, it cut the size in half. Now, I might hear you saying already, but that's not what I wanted to do. Well, if that's not what you want to do, then you have to make sure the resample box is clicked. And we're going to go ahead and just put 8.5 by 11 in here, so it definitely gets the message. So now it's in a resample mode, and it selects an automatic resampling mode from a list. But you can see that the quality of the edges has sort of declined somewhat, particularly through through here. That's really visible. So let's look at some of these resampling modes, and these are basically going to be the things that kind of you know, control what the appearance of the resampled image is. Because in order to double the resolution and keep it the same size, oh, I just made a quick little mistake there. I'm gonna paper over that because I actually set the width and the height in the wrong order. So there, that's okay, that's better. So if we go to something like preserve details, or all of these are sort of known as being good for enlargement, that's what we're doing right now. We're making the file larger. You know, we can see what effect different resampling schemes have. So you can see here, that's meh, okay. Nearest neighbor is another one that's really popular. And you can see with nearest neighbor, we're getting a little bit of weird fuzz. Part of the reason why we're not getting a lot of artifacts on the edges is that we're not actually resampling it enough to show that. So if I really amp up the resolution, so now this is 4 times as large, you can see what has happened. Basically, I am left with these sort of pixelated looking edges, which in general is considered like really bad. Although I've seen people use it as like a, you know, an effect. But this is usually considered like really bad craft. So, and why is it bad? Well, it's bad because I'm asking this image to be 1, 2, 3, 4 times larger than it started off at. Maybe even more actually. And then, not a math person, don't have a calculator on me. So then I'm also using kind of a not the greatest resampling scheme. So if I go back up here to one of these, you know, smoothing modes, that's a little bit better. Maybe a little bit better. Personally, I don't know which is worse, the fuzzy line or the line with pixels in it. And if you want to remember what this looked like, you know, kind of, we'll put it in automatic mode and see what it does. Nah, not much. Let's go back to where we were originally and see what it looks like. So once again, there's a little bit of what I would call like, you know, not the greatest anti-aliasing here. But you can see this all looks really smooth and nice. And it's just, I mean, when you scale things up and they have pixels, bad things might happen. Okay things might happen if you do it in a kind of gradual or not crazy way. And so for me to say, hey, this image that is 8.5 by 11 at 300 DPI, or 300 PPI rather, would I be able to get by with this at like 450 DPI? The answer is almost certainly. Yeah, it's fine. It looks fine. But again, it's that, you know, kind of pushing it to the extreme, and, you know, basically more than doubling it is usually kind of bad mojo. So, you know, here we can kind of go back to that, like, we don't want to see this necessarily happening to the edges. So all that to say that, you know, resolution is kind of important when you're working in Photoshop, and it's definitely not complicated. You just have to be able to kind of think through it. And if I were to throw out kind of a general rule, I know rules are fun and it's always good to have those like top 5 things you should never do in Photoshop. One of them is make a pixel-based image more than twice its size. Like never. Just don't do it. So if you think this is bad, just this little bit of artifacting is bad on a black and white kind of edge, just think about what it would do to your face. Oh, Yeah, it's not a good thing. And it definitely makes I mean, of course, there are some images that you won't notice the difference, but in general, it's really bad. Okay, cross that off my list. Let's see. Oh, I didn't actually want to do it, so I'm going to cancel. And so, you know, normal kind of resolution levels, by the way, I might have a chance to say this again at some point in class. If you're making an object for print or you're trying to print a photograph, I would aim somewhere between 600 and 1200. The minimum quality for a print is going to be 300 DPI. PPI. They're the same thing, by the way, in practice. The other thing that you might think about with resolution is the idea of screen resolution. So if you're wondering, well, what resolution is this thing that I grabbed off the internet? The answer is almost always 72 is screen resolution. So if I were to put this image at screen resolution, let me just show you what would happen. It's going to have to resample it because it's actually making it a bit smaller. So by turning the resolution down to 72, if I just go ahead and preview the pixels, the number of pixels is really the important thing, although the resolution is also potentially important depending on what software program you're going to be viewing it in. If you're viewing it in, you know, a web browser, the web browser is always going to display it at 72 DPI. So this number is actually somewhat less important. But this image at this scale at 72 DPI comes out to be about 700 by 600 pixels. So I'm just going to go ahead real quickly and save it just to show you what happens here. So go ahead and save it as a JPEG. And let's see. So when you make a JPEG, you have the option of compressing it. I try to compress my JPEGs as little as possible because they're already going to be compressed on top of that. So just click OK. And now let's have a look in, of course, I had to put it in the wrong folder. Let's see, because I do that. Okay, as I said before, I kind of put it in a weird folder. But at this point, we have a JPEG that is so-called screen resolution. And what you can do with it, well, obviously, you know, you can look at it in Quick Look. There it is in all its glory. You can also look at it in the web browser. So you can just open it up directly in Chrome. And you can see that, you know, in Chrome, it's appearing at that sort of 792 versus 612 pixels at that exact size. If you get into website making, there's a little bit of kind of jiggery-pokery that you can do to make web images display differently. But for the most part, the kind of easy and best way to do it is just to make them the right size. So you can certainly do that in Photoshop. Photoshop's a great tool for working on web images. So let's get back into Photoshop and we're going to kind of jump into the next thing. So I'm going to go ahead and close this image and kind of start afresh. One of the things that I wanted to draw your attention to in the presets was that, you know, obviously we've gone ahead and made some presets from my own recent items. So right now everything is kind of set up correctly for our project. I did want to also point out to you that there are presets for pretty much every kind of application. And so photo, as you can see, it's in 300 ppi, so that's kind of standard for like a medium quality photo. Then there's print work and at sort of like more, magazine and print sizes. The web preset, you may notice that if you want to use the web preset, the nice thing about the web preset is that it does kind of automatically put it in 72 dpi, and it automatically changes the units to pixels here. So that can be kind of good. And then of course film and video, if you need to edit film or video frames, which we could potentially, you could do for our upcoming projects if you wanted to. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just create my sort of recent one. So I'll pull this one out. There it is. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so now I have a white background, it looks like, which is fine. And I'm going to go ahead and get some photo data in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up another document. So let me go back to the folder I was in. Okay, so first of all, before I kind of bring this photo into the other photo, I'm going to kind of maybe think a little bit about what size this photo is. And of course, I can find that information out in the Finder of my Mac OS by just, putting it in column mode, or doing the Apple I to get more info. But now that I'm in Photoshop, I might as well just do it in Photoshop. So, so I'm going to go ahead and just notice the image size is always down here. So it's telling me that it's at 56, let's see, 56, basically like 5,600 by 3,700 pixels. It's also in 72 pixel resolution mode right now. So that's going to be kind of interesting because this is in 300 pixel resolution mode right now. So what would I do if I wanted to add this image to that? Well, if I wanted to get really predictable results, I would probably start by changing the resolution of this to match the resolution of my kind of canvas image. So over here, I'm just going to make sure that I have this image selected, and I'm going to go to select, image size. And here I am in image size again. And so right now, I don't want to actually like change the size of the image. I just want to change the resolution. So by changing the resolution, it will kind of automatically resize the image to compensate. So basically what I'm saying is I want to uncheck the resample box. Ideally, you would only check the resample box when you're consciously trying to make the image, the pixel image itself larger. Or in other words, you want to add pixels. And at this point, we don't want to add pixels. We just want to change the ratio of the resolution to the physical scale. So if I make this 300 dpi, let's see what, 3 ppi, let's see what happens there. Well, you can see that at 300 ppi, this image is about 18 by 12. And that's totally fine. I'm just going to click OK here. When I say it's totally fine, I mean, to be clear, it's totally not fine. But we're going to be able to import it into that image. So I think what I probably would do is just go ahead and scale it to the image in the actual image here. So I'll just demonstrate. So I want to go ahead and I can just grab this background layer and kind of hover it over this until it opens. And now it's open and I can just put it down. this is fine. This is the target, it says the target document has a different depth than the source document. This may result in lower than expected quality. Do you want to proceed? Yes. This is basically just saying that I used my fancy camera to take this, and this sort of canvas here does not have fancy camera color mode. And yeah, that's makes sense. Okay, so there it is. Now, you may notice some things happened to this image along the way, namely that it got cropped. It appears to have been cropped, let's put it that way. But don't panic. Don't panic yet. Way too soon to panic. If we go ahead and go to our Move tool, which is right here at the top, and we click a box that up here that says Show Transform Controls, you can see that it gave us a bounding box basically around the entire image. And so I can just go ahead and holding the Shift key down to keep it proportional. If I don't hit the Shift key, it does, well, it keeps it proportional anyway. That's so great. It's like I'm living in the future. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get it so that it's actually, well, I guess maybe having it slightly cropped off is probably better, because now you can see that it's not directly proportional to this. I think that seems like a decent amount of crop. We can't really do much more without getting some sort of like border maybe around the image, and we don't want that. So now I've made this transformation by clicking around the bounding box and kind of dragging it into place. And as I make this transformation, you may notice that I can set the interpolation mode, which that seems an awful lot like the thing that we were doing in the image size box, and that's because it's exactly the same. So I think probably I would tend to go for something like bicubic automatic for this image. With a photo that has so much detail, it's going to have a good experience. Actually scaling this down a tiny bit. So scaling down in general also almost always gives you better quality results, but it can cause the same problems that scaling up can if it's extreme. If you take like a poster and turn it into a web, icon or something. So in any case, we are going to go ahead and hit this this commit transform box. This box has caused me and everyone else in the world a lot of trauma, because until you click it, you can't do anything with Photoshop. So it basically kind of prevents you from doing anything, and it kind of locks you out of Photoshop. So it really frustrates people, and it's a very simple thing that me and everyone else in the world just forgets to do. So don't forget to hit that check mark. And so now we have this object kind of on this canvas, and that's great. So if you go to the layers palette, the layers palette is sort of like one of my top 5 palettes for sure. Maybe it might even be my #1 palette. So you can see that basically what we did is we threw this image on top of the background right now. And so we're not going to get too into the layers palette, but if I use this, little eye icon, I can, kind of show you that the background is still down there. We just need to get to it if we need to. And so speaking of the background, I think I'm going to kind of illustrate that right now, how we would go ahead and take something from the background and put it up into the other layer. So let's see, what can we do here? Well, I think I want to show you just some really simple ways to select and start selecting and editing photos. So let's go ahead and come up here and So right here is something called the Object Selection tool. I'm not a giant fan of it, but we'll look at it eventually. There's also something called the Quick Selection tool, which we will also look at eventually in this class. For this image, I know that those are not going to be great tools to work with, so I'm going to use the plain old Magic Wand tool, which is sort of like the basic. It's the selection tools on basic option. And I'm going to come in here into my image, and I'm going to just select some stuff. So there, I made a selection. That was pretty easy. I might like to go ahead and make a few more selections. And if I do that, I would want to probably hit the Shift key to add to my selection. And the Magic Wand tool, as you can probably tell just by looking at it, it kind of works based on color. And so it can be kind of unpredictable. We're going to go ahead and work with this little selection anyway, because I think we can do some cool stuff with it. Can you spend hours and hours and hours making a selection? Absolutely. I do it all the time. Do you need to? No, not necessarily. So now that this is a selection, what are the kind of most basic things that we can do with it? Well, one of the most basic things we could do with it would be to just hit the delete key. And what that does is it reveals the layer underneath it. Okay? As long as these little marching ants are active, the selection is active and you can do stuff with it. You can even move the selection and like do it somewhere else, which can be kind of a neat effect. And these are like just like the most basic kind of things you can do with selections. Oh, now I just did it. I lost my selection. I deselected my selection. Don't panic. You can go to up here. You can go to select, deselect, and then, well, if we go to reselect here, it's probably going to bring back that little crappy selection that I accidentally made. We can also, of course, go to our history palette and go to where it says deselect, and one step smaller than that, one back, and then you found your selection again. So especially if you work for a really long time on kind of getting one of these made, it can be really, really frustrating to, you know, kind of lose it. So don't let that happen to you. So anyway, I'm just making kind of a fun pattern here on this selection. And I think that that's probably the most we're going to do with this right now. So let's imagine that I'm totally done with the selection. I don't even want to deal with it anymore. And like it's served its purpose. Okay. So, well, I guess I would probably say that the first thing you should do is go to deselect the selection. Because if you try to do other stuff, like let's go ahead and maybe paint some stuff on the top layer here. So I'm gonna paint some stuff and whoa. So as you can see, the selection is actually kind of limiting where I paint on the canvas. Oh, it's kind of cool, you know, but it's totally not what I want, maybe. So what I need to do in order to kind of like liberate my brush is I need to go ahead and click deselect, which is up in the select menu. And it's also Apple D or Control D. And then you can start to go crazy with the other stuff. It's a fish. It's a shark. Anyway, so I'm gonna not keep that in there. So let's see. that is really kind of like the most basic selection tool. There are so many selection tools, it's kind of unreal. And the best way to kind of use a selection tool is to build what's called a mask. So we've been sort of using it, what I would call like kind of quick mode, or, you know, like quick and shameful mode. If we go back just a few steps, well, if we go back to the point where we transformed the image into the right size, if we wanted to make a different type of selection, we could totally do that with some of these other tools. So one of the overlooked tools are the rectangular and elliptical marquee tool. And, you know, you can do some really cool things with them visually. So, for example, like, I'll just go ahead and use the elliptical marquee tool here. And maybe I'll put another one. Sorry, I'm having trackpad issues. I'm going to go ahead and get a nice big one and then put it wherever I want. So one thing that I can do here really quickly is I can actually take this selection, and I can actually transform it. And so what that allows me to do is it just allows me to have kind of more sophisticated editing tools to edit it. So for example, if I didn't want it to be perfectly circular, you know, I could play around with these angles or spin or anything like that. So that can be a really useful tool if you want to use it. It basically turns the selection into kind of any other shape in Photoshop. So I'm going to make one more of these things. Well, I think for now, So I just made a really simple selection, and I can cut and paste, and it's basically going to just cut and paste that selection onto a new layer. So that's like a default kind of thing that happens with any selection. So in other words, I didn't really have to make a mask here because I knew exactly what pixels I wanted out of that. And so you can't really tell right now that they're on a new layer, but if we hit the move tool, which is up here, then we could start to maybe think about, you know, moving them. And so, you know, sometimes people go for really complicated selections when it's actually just not necessary. Like, you can get a really compelling visual effect with some of the simplest selection tools, and they're actually the easiest to use. Now, that being said, we're going to talk about making really complicated selections. I just wanted to kind of make that point that it doesn't have to be that way. You can make it a lot easier on yourself. And it can be actually just as cool, if not cooler, because it's all about design and, you know, the decisions that you make. So, I mean, pulling this kind of out of its, you know, environment and having it hover, you know, hover in the air, well, that's kind of neat. So let's go ahead and go to talking about layer masks. And so I want to make one more kind of like big selection. And I think I'm going to make a somewhat complicated selection. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a different type of selection. So we've been dealing with selection tools up to this point. I think I'm going to try to do a color range selection. So that is from, you can see that from the selection menu. And I'm going to click this orange color because I'm pretty sure, and I think it looks like I'm right, that there's not a lot of other you know, orange weirdness in the image. So I'm clicking different points on the color to just see how I can get different samples. Yeah, I think this is the, damn it. So I'm clicking on localized color clusters so that it doesn't pull from the kind of grid on the top. And I may make the fuzziness just a little bit more there. Okay, so then when I click OK, you can see that these sort of like random color points in the image have been selected, and that's kind of a good thing. It's interesting, I'll tell you that much. So if I wanted to, let's say, like delete all these pixels and make them white, they're definitely not right now. So how would that even work? Like, what would I do? Well, I could go ahead and add these selected pixels to what's called a mask. And by doing that, I would just go up here to Layer, Layer Mask. And in this case, I want to reveal the selection and hide everything else. So that's my Reveal Selection mask. Okay. So as you can see, it has kind of edited out that whole area. Now, before I did that, I probably should have duplicated this layer. So I'll show you how to do that real quickly, just for finality purposes. So I'll go ahead and just duplicate this layer. The cool thing about a layer mask is that rather than deleting everything else in the image, which is what we would have been doing, with a layer mask, you're basically giving yourself some options. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and just throw this layer mask away. Delete. And you can see what has happened there is that my image is untouched. And so layer masks are a great way to do kind of radical things to your image and then still be able to get to all the image data afterwards. So in some ways, it's a good way of saving a selection, but it's also a good way of like not deleting most of your image, you know, if you want to select only part of it. So the sort of technical term for what we just did in a layer mask is called non-destructive editing. And so in any case, you know, it can be really great. The super cool thing about layer masks that I can show you before we kind of part ways today is that you can take a layer mask and you can take any painting tool and you can edit the mask. So I'm going to change my sort of active color to white. I'm a fish. So basically what I just did is I just pulled information out of the layer mask by basically editing it live. And so, you know, I could also just say, well, that's it. I just want to make these like big, weird, fingery things instead. Of course, and I can undo that move just like I would any other in the brush tool. And then the greatest thing about all of this is that I still have my original layer back here, kind of waiting in the wings for when I don't want to make it into a shark. It's anxious for that moment. Okay, so I will talk to you all next week. I think this is plenty for now. Oh, wait, before we go, sorry. Now, we've gone from a 1-layered file to a 3-layered file, so some changes have taken place, and we want to be able to just make sure we're doing everything right and everything's cool. So I will go ahead and save this file. I'm going to save it for a couple reasons. I'm going to save it because obviously the universe is not kind. And obviously, I don't want to lose any of the work that I already put, kind of put into stuff. So I'm just going to save it as collage.psd in, one of my personal directory folders. And the Photoshop format is probably the best thing to save it as right now. If there's a time when you're planning on not having access to Adobe software, you may want to save things as a layered TIFF file, and then you would be able to open it up in other, open source alternatives to Photoshop. So that's pretty much it. We can go for Photoshop right now. Later, maybe save as TIFF. I usually always save a backup of my stuff as TIFF, just because I'm superstitious that way. Pretty much always click this maximize compatibility box. All right, well, I will see you next week, and we're going to just keep chugging with Photoshop.